Ryan's Office Revenge.
I watched Jordan Wells walk into my office like he owned the place, his team of executives trailing behind him like they were his personal cheerleaders. 26 years old with an MBA still warm from the printer, while I'd spent the last 23 years building this manufacturing operation from the ground up. My name is Scott Martinez, I'm 49, and until 3 weeks ago I thought I knew how the game was played. "Everyone," Jordan announced, gesturing toward me like I was an old piece of machinery, "I'd like you to meet Scott, who'll be helping us understand our legacy operations while we modernize for the future." The room went dead silent. Nobody looked at me. Not Henry from production, not Patricia from admin, not even Glenn Morrison, our CEO, who'd worked alongside me for over a decade. They all found something fascinating about their shoes or their phones, anything but my face. "We need fresh energy in our manufacturing processes," Glenn said, his hand on Jordan's shoulder. "Scott can help you. Understand our history while you lead us forward." History. That's what I was becoming while still breathing. "The corner office will work better for our digital transformation initiatives," Jordan told me, pointing to a cramped space near the supply room. "I'll need your office cleared out by lunch." My office. The space where I'd spent countless late nights keeping our production lines running, where the walls still displayed thank you letters from clients whose orders I'd saved during equipment failures and supply shortages. The corner office where I'd built relationships with suppliers across 3 countries, negotiated deals that saved the company millions, trained 2 generations of production managers. "Understood," I replied, keeping my voice steady even though my hands weren't. 3 hours later, I watched maintenance guys carry my 20-year service plaque in a cardboard box, while Jordan supervised the installation of some abstract art on my former walls. "The old desk needs to go too," he instructed them. "It's completely outdated. That desk had been a gift from my production team after we'd won the company's efficiency award 3 years running. Solid oak, built to last. Unlike whatever trendy garbage was replacing it. My new workspace came with a wobbling chair and a computer that wheezed when it started up. The kind of setup they give to people they're hoping will quit. When my phone rang, it was Henry, my direct report for the last 8 years. "Scott, I'm sorry, but Jordan's called a meeting in conference room A. Right now. He said it's just for department heads." I was being locked out of a meeting about my own operation. The operation I'd grown from 50 employees to 200. The lines I'd personally designed and optimized. "No problem," I lied. After hanging up, I found an email from Jordan to the entire manufacturing division. Innovation, efficiency, modernization, moving beyond outdated methods. Attached was an 18-page presentation. I opened it and something just clicked. These weren't just similar to the process improvements I'd proposed 8 months ago. These were my exact proposals, down to the specific equipment modifications for lines 3 and 5. The lean manufacturing protocols I'd developed after studying our production bottlenecks for 6 months. The same proposals Glenn had called too aggressive when I'd presented them. Word for word, chart for chart, even my color scheme. A sticky note appeared on my desk at 4:30. My office, 5 p.m. sharp. Jordan. I found him leaning against my old desk, tapping on his phone like he was running Apple. Probably ordering another latte with his expense account. "Sit down," he said without looking up. I stayed standing. He finally glanced up with that practiced smile they teach in business school. "Your manufacturing optimization proposal was well received in today's executive meeting." "You mean my proposal?" His smile didn't budge. "Your research provided useful groundwork, certainly, but groundwork isn't architecture, Scott. I've modernized and elevated your basic concepts into something actionable. You copied my work word for word in several sections. That's a serious accusation," he replied, setting his phone down, "especially from someone in your position." "My position?" People who've been at one company too long often become territorial, change-resistant. Glenn understands this transition might be difficult for you. The kid was 26 and talking to me like I was his grandfather having trouble with the TV remote. "Is that why you excluded me from my own department meeting today?" He sighed like he was dealing with a stubborn child. I needed candid feedback about operational leadership. People aren't always comfortable speaking honestly with their former supervisor present. That hit me hard. He'd been collecting complaints about me, turning my own people against me. "We're restructuring the manufacturing division next month," he continued, straightening his tie. Some positions will be eliminated, others will evolve. Your future here depends entirely on your ability to adapt. The threat was crystal clear. Play ball or get cut. Is there anything else? I asked quietly. Yes. The Bennett Industries presentation tomorrow. I'll be handling it. Charles Bennett, CEO of our biggest client for 16 years. The guy who'd personally called me last month to thank me for getting his emergency order out during that snowstorm. He'd specifically requested me for their annual operations review. Charles specifically asked for me to present. I spoke with Charles this morning. He understands our new direction. Jordan was systematically stripping away everything I'd built. My authority, my client relationships, my reputation. Like dismantling a machine, remove one component at a time until the whole thing stops working. That's all, he said, going back to his phone. I walked past the glass-walled conference room where my team was still in their meeting. They went silent as I passed, eyes darting away like kids caught talking about their teacher. Whatever Jordan had told them had changed something fundamental. Back at my cramped desk, a new email from HR was waiting. Performance Improvement Plan, confidential, a formal PIP, the first step toward termination. The document cited resistance to new leadership and territorial behavior. I stared at that email for a long time. 23 years with this company. Worked through pneumonia twice. Missed my daughter's graduation to save a critical shipment when our main supplier went belly up. Turned down 3 better offers because I believed in what we were building here. Built relationships with customers who trusted me personally, not just the company logo. Now I was being pushed out by someone whose entire strategy was built on my work. I shut down my computer, grabbed my jacket, and left without saying goodbye to anyone. In my truck, I sat for 20 minutes, staring at the manufacturing building I'd helped design and expand. The loading dock I'd reconfigured to improve efficiency. The employee parking lot I'd lobbied to get expanded when we hired 50 new people in 2019. Something just clicked in my head. Not anger, that would come later. More like the feeling you get when you finally understand how a complex machine works. They thought they were watching a man being gradually pushed out. They expected anger, outbursts, maybe a resignation letter by Friday. They had no idea who they were dealing with. That night, I didn't complain to my wife or call my buddies to vent. Instead, I opened my laptop and began working. Not on my resume, not on a complaint to HR, on a file. A very specific file that would change everything. See, when you've been in manufacturing operations for over 20 years, you develop habits. You document everything. Equipment failures, process improvements, safety incidents, financial impacts, supplier contracts, client communications, not because you're planning for a moment like this, but because that's how you protect the operation and the people who depend on it. I started with Jordan's presentation. Opened it side by side with my original proposal from 8 months ago, screenshot after screenshot, highlighting the identical language, the exact same data points, even the footnote references I'd spent weeks researching. The kid hadn't just stolen my ideas, he'd been lazy about it, but that was just the beginning. I pulled up Jordan's LinkedIn profile. Digital Transformation Officer at Hartwell Manufacturing. That was his previous job. Company went bankrupt 14 months ago. Interesting timing. A quick Google search brought up news articles about Hartwell's collapse. Sudden operational changes led to safety violations and production failures. Lean manufacturing initiatives backfired, causing massive client losses. Leadership blamed previous management for resistance to innovation. The same playbook he was running here. I dug deeper. Public filings, court documents from the bankruptcy proceedings. Hartwell had been acquired by something called Synergy Capital Group 3 months after filing Chapter 11. Their manufacturing assets sold for 30% of book value. I made myself another coffee and kept digging. Synergy Capital Group, shell company registered in Delaware, but the real money came from Morrison Industries. Our biggest competitor, the same company that had been trying to buy us out for 3 years, getting turned down every time. Now things were getting interesting. I spent the next 4 hours building a timeline. Jordan joins Hartwell as Digital Transformation Officer in January 2022. Implements efficiency improvements that gut their safety protocols and push production beyond equipment limits. Quality drops, major clients cancel contracts. Company files bankruptcy in August 2023. Jordan leaves 2 months before the filing with a consulting opportunity. Hartwell gets acquired by Synergy Capital, which strips the valuable client, contracts, and manufacturing processes, then closes the plants. 400 jobs gone. The intellectual property and client relationships get transferred to Morrison Industries. Jordan shows up here 6 months later. But I needed proof he was more than just incompetent. I needed evidence of deliberate sabotage. I called Edward Torres the next morning, found his number through mutual connections on LinkedIn, former CFO at Hartwell, terminated 3 months before the collapse. Guy answered on the second ring. Edward Torres speaking. Mr. Torres, this is Scott Martinez from Riverside Manufacturing. I'm calling about Jordan Wells. Long pause. What about him? He's implementing the same strategies here that he used at Hartwell. I'm seeing identical patterns to what led to your bankruptcy. Another pause, longer this time. Are you recording this call? No, sir. Good, because what I'm about to tell you, Jordan and his lawyers made sure I couldn't say publicly, but if he's doing it again, he took a breath. Can we meet in person? 2 days later, I drove 3 hours to meet Edward at a diner outside Cleveland. Guy looked like he hadn't slept well since Hartwell went under. Introduced himself, shook my hand, ordered black coffee. Jordan Wells isn't just incompetent, he said straight out. He's a corporate saboteur. Professional one. He laid it out for me. Jordan's efficiency improvements at Hartwell were designed to fail. Push equipment past safe operating limits until breakdowns became inevitable. Cut safety redundancies that seemed unnecessary until accidents happened. Eliminate redundant quality checks that caught defects before they reached customers. Every decision made sense on paper, Edward said. Increased throughput, reduced costs, eliminated waste. But in practice, it created a house of cards. When it collapsed, it looked like management failure, not sabotage. How'd you figure it out? Financial patterns. Jordan received 3 consulting payments from offshore accounts while he was employed at Hartwell, payments that corresponded exactly with his major strategy implementations. Edward slid a folder across the table. Copies of the wire transfers, bank records, timeline documentation, all legally obtained during the bankruptcy investigation, all public record if you know where to look. I opened the folder. Bank routing numbers traced back to accounts controlled by Synergy Capital, the same group that had acquired Hartwell's assets. Morrison Industries hired Jordan to destroy us from the inside, I said. That's my assessment. And if he's following the same pattern at your company, Edward finished his coffee. Your people are going to lose their jobs. Your clients will lose confidence. Your assets will be available for acquisition at fire sale prices. I studied the documents. Wire transfers for $50,000, $75,000, $100,000. Paid to Jordan Wells through a consulting company that existed only on paper. Why didn't this come out during the bankruptcy? Edward's face darkened. Because Synergy Capital's lawyers offered me a settlement, generous severance, non-disclosure agreement, glowing references for my next job. All I had to do was keep quiet about Jordan's role. But you're talking to me now. Because 400 people lost their jobs, and I stayed quiet. Some of those folks, they'd been at Hartwell for 20, 30 years. Good people. They deserved better. He stood up. If Jordan's doing it again, he needs to be stopped. I drove back with Edward's folder on my passenger seat, mind racing. I had Jordan's pattern of behavior, financial evidence of payoffs, and testimony from a credible witness. But I needed more. I needed to catch Jordan in the act at our company. Over the next week, I quietly reached out to other people I knew in the industry. Manufacturing guys, operations managers, people who'd been around long enough to know how things really work. Turned out Jordan's reputation preceded him. Heard he was trouble, said Mike Harrison from Baldwin. Manufacturing, young hotshot who shows up, promises the moon, leaves behind disasters. Guy's got connections, though, added Tom Rodriguez from Pacific Industries. Board-level connections, makes him untouchable until the damage is done. I compiled everything into a comprehensive file. Jordan's history, the financial evidence, witness statements, pattern analysis. But most importantly, I documented every decision he'd made at our company and compared it to his playbook at Hartwell. Same strategy, same timeline, same predictable outcome. The genius of it was its subtlety. Nothing Jordan did looked obviously wrong. Efficiency improvements, cost cutting, digital transformation, all buzzwords that made executives salivate. By the time the consequences became apparent, Jordan would be long gone. and the blame would fall on legacy management who resisted necessary changes. But I had 23 years of institutional knowledge that Jordan couldn't anticipate. I knew which of his improvements would cause equipment failures. I knew which cost cuts would trigger safety violations. I knew which client relationships his approach would destroy. More importantly, I knew how to prove it. Time to set the trap. I arrived early the next morning, before the security guard, before the cleaning crew finished. Placed a single manila folder on Jordan's desk with a simple note, "For your review, historical operational data and outcomes." Then I went to grab coffee and wait for my 8 a.m. production meeting, the one remaining item still on my calendar. The folder contained 47 pages of evidence. Jordan's complete playbook from Hartwell, side-by-side comparisons with his strategies at our company, financial records showing his payments from Synergy Capital, and Edward Torres's sworn statement about the sabotage pattern. Everything cross-referenced, indexed, and documented like a legal brief. But the real trap was simpler than that. I'd also included predictions, specific dates when Jordan's efficiency improvements would cause equipment failures, which client relationships would collapse when quality dropped, how long it would take for safety violations to trigger regulatory shutdowns, all based on the exact same timeline from Hartwell. If Jordan was just incompetent, he'd ignore the warnings and let the disasters happen. If he was a saboteur, he'd have to either accelerate his timeline or find excuses to delay the implementations. Either way, he'd reveal his true nature. When I returned at 10:30, something had clearly happened. People were huddled in small groups, conversations stopping when I walked by. Security guards stood outside the executive wing. Patricia hurried over, eyes wide. "What did you do?" "I shared some historical context," I replied. "Jordan ran into Glenn's office screaming 20 minutes ago. Then security came. They're all in there now, the entire executive team." I nodded calmly and headed to my small desk. The trap had worked faster than expected. "Aren't you worried?" Patricia asked, following me. "About what?" "About..." She gestured toward the executive offices where raised voices could be heard through the supposedly soundproof walls. "No," I said simply. "I'm not worried at all." What I didn't tell Patricia was that I'd sent copies of the file to 3 other people that morning. Charles Bennett at our biggest client, because he deserved to know his account was being sabotaged. Dave Morrison at the State Manufacturing Association, because other companies needed to be warned. And my lawyer, because I figured Jordan's people would come after me hard. At noon, an email arrived from Glenn's assistant. "Meeting requested. Executive conference room. Immediate." The walk felt different than usual. Eyes followed me, some curious, others fearful. Whatever was happening had rippled through the entire facility like news that layoffs were coming. I found Glenn seated at the head of the table, flanked by our legal counsel and HR director. Jordan was nowhere to be seen, but there was a polished man in an expensive suit I didn't recognize. Had to be Jordan's lawyer. Guys like that don't come cheap. "Sit down, Scott," Glenn said, his expression unreadable. I chose a seat directly across from him, placing my hands calmly on the table. "The file you left for Jordan," he began. "Where did you get this information?" "From our company records," I replied, "plus publicly available financial data and testimony from industry contacts." The legal counsel, a sharp woman named Linda Stevens, leaned forward. "You've made extremely serious allegations." "I haven't made allegations," I corrected her. "I simply compiled data. The patterns speak for themselves." Glenn rubbed his temples like he was getting a migraine. "You're claiming Jordan deliberately implemented strategies at his previous company that led to their bankruptcy, and now he's replicating those same strategies here. The data supports that conclusion." "Yes, that's absurd," the expensive suit interjected. "My client is a respected business professional. Why would anyone deliberately sabotage their own employer?" I met his gaze steadily. 3 months before his previous company filed for bankruptcy, Jordan received substantial consulting payments from offshore accounts controlled by Synergy Capital Group, the same group that later acquired Hartwell's assets and transferred them to Morrison Industries, our biggest competitor. Silence fell over the room like someone had turned off the air conditioning. "You understand what you're implying," Glenn said quietly. "I'm not implying anything. I'm showing you numbers, dates, and wire transfers that exist in public records." The HR director cleared her throat. "Jordan claims you fabricated this conspiracy theory in retaliation for the performance improvement plan." I opened my laptop. "Would you like to see the original sources?" "I've indexed everything. Bank records, bankruptcy filings, SEC documents, witness statements, all independently verifiable. Glenn's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then stood abruptly. "Wait here." When the door closed behind them, I remained perfectly still. Through the glass wall, I could see them huddled with several executives I didn't recognize, likely from our parent company. The expensive suit was on his phone, pacing like a caged animal. 20 minutes passed before Glenn returned alone, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. "Jordan has been suspended pending investigation," he said, sinking into his chair. "The Corporate Oversight Committee is flying in tonight." "I see." He studied me with new eyes, like he was seeing me for the first time. "You've been with us for 23 years. Why didn't you come to me directly with this information?" I considered my answer carefully. "Would you have believed me over the rising star who promised to increase our efficiency by 30% in 6 months? His silence was answer enough. "You authorized him to place me on a performance improvement plan after 2 decades of clean reviews," I continued. "You allowed him to dismantle my operation without consultation. You applauded when he presented my strategies as his own." He winced like I'd slapped him. "I thought you represented the past and he was the future," I finished for him. "What do you want, Scott? To make this right? What do you want?" I almost laughed. "I don't want his job." "Then what?" "I want respect. Not just for me, but for every person who builds something valuable in this company. I want leadership that values institutional knowledge alongside innovation. I want credit given where it's due." Glenn nodded slowly. "That's reasonable. And I want the Bennett Industries account back today, before their contract reconsideration deadline." "Done." I stood to leave, but Glenn stopped me. "The file. How long have you been working on it?" "I haven't been working on it at all," I replied. "I just pay attention. Always have." As I left the executive floor, my phone lit up with messages from team members who'd suddenly remembered I existed. Henry, Patricia, even people from other divisions. Word was spreading fast, but the real test was still coming. Jordan's lawyers wouldn't give up easily, and Morrison Industries had deep pockets. This was far from over. I ignored the messages and headed back to my cramped desk. Time to prepare for the next phase. By evening, Jordan's name had been removed from the company directory. His office, my former office, sat empty, the abstract art already gone from the walls. But I knew this was just the opening move. At home that night, I poured myself a bourbon and finally let myself process what had happened. My phone rang just as I was starting to relax. Unknown number. "Hello, is this Scott Martinez?" A woman's voice, professional but cold. "Yes, this is Linda Stevens from Corporate Oversight. I'd like to discuss your findings in person tomorrow morning." My stomach tightened. Of course. I should inform you that Jordan has retained legal counsel. He's claiming wrongful termination and defamation. There it was. The counterattack. Jordan wouldn't go quietly. "I understand," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "The information you compiled is concerning, but his legal team is questioning your methods and motives. Everything in that file can be independently verified, so you say. We'll need to examine this thoroughly. In the meantime, I've instructed Glenn to place you on administrative leave." The room seemed to tilt. "Administrative leave? On what grounds?" "Standard procedure during an investigation of this nature. We need to ensure there's no perception of conflict while we review both sides. Both sides, as if this were a simple disagreement between colleagues. We'll expect you at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Please bring all relevant materials." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen staring at nothing. Administrative leave. Same status as Jordan. In one move, they'd equalized us. Accuser and accused. My doorbell rang 30 minutes later. Through the peephole, I saw Henry shifting nervously on my porch. "I should have stood up for you," he said when I opened the door. "We all should have." I let him in without comment. "Is it true? About Jordan sabotaging his last company?" "You tell me," I replied. "You worked on his presentations. Did anything strike you as odd about his efficiency projections?" He looked down. "The line 3 modifications. They're impossible without sacrificing our safety margins. I tried to tell him, but he said you'd made us too cautious. And what did you think?" "I thought—" He hesitated. "I thought maybe he was right. That maybe you had become too conservative." His honesty stung, but I appreciated it. "The Oversight Committee is coming tomorrow," I told him. I've been placed on administrative leave, same as Jordan. His eyes widened. That's insane. After what you uncovered. They're treating it as a personal dispute, his word against mine. But the evidence can be interpreted different ways, especially when one party has powerful connections. Henry's expression hardened. Tell me what to do. How can I help? I studied his face. Why did you come here tonight, Henry? Because I was wrong. Because we all were. And because I've worked with you for 8 years. I know who you really are. I nodded slowly. Then that's what I need. People who know who I really are. The oversight meeting the next morning was held in our main conference room. When I arrived, I found not just Linda Stevens and the executives, but nearly 20 people, including Henry and other team members who'd apparently requested to attend. Linda began without pleasantries. Mr. Martinez, we've reviewed your file on Jordan Wells. His legal representation has provided a response claiming you've misrepresented data to create a false narrative due to personal animosity. Beside her sat Jordan's expensive lawyer. He smiled thinly at me. Furthermore, Linda continued, they've submitted evidence that you've been resistant to necessary changes, underperforming in your role, and attempting to undermine new leadership. My heart sank. Jordan had been building a case against me from day one. Before we proceed, I should inform you that Jordan has offered to drop potential legal action if you retract your claims and resign immediately. The lawyer slid a document across the table, a resignation letter already prepared. The room went silent, all eyes on me. I picked up the resignation letter, feeling the weight of every stare. The paper felt expensive, probably cost more than my hourly wage. This is quite thorough, I remarked, my voice steady. Prepared in advance, I assume? The lawyer nodded. We wanted to make this transition as smooth as possible. Smooth for whom, exactly? I placed the resignation letter back on the table. I won't be signing this. The lawyer's smile faltered. I strongly advise you to reconsider. Mr. Wells' evidence is substantial. I look forward to reviewing it. All of it. Linda nodded to an assistant who distributed thick folders. I opened mine to find dozens of pages, emails taken out of context, performance metrics selectively presented, statements from team members that had clearly been edited. As you can see, the lawyer said, Mr. Wells has documented a pattern of resistance and underperformance. I flipped through slowly, nodding as if considering their weight. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out my own stack of folders, one for each person at the table. What's this? Linda asked as I passed them around. Context, I replied simply. The room fell silent as they began reading. I'd spent 2 weeks preparing these folders with Henry's help. Complete versions of the emails Jordan had excerpted, full performance metrics showing our division's consistent growth, and most importantly, signed statements from team members who'd come forward after word spread about the investigation. Henry was first to speak. Jordan told me Scott was being pushed into early retirement, that I should distance myself if I wanted to advance. Patricia nodded from across the table. He said the same to me, that there was a confidential performance issue with Scott that he couldn't discuss, but we should align with new leadership. He played us against each other, Henry added, told each of us that the others had concerns about Scott's management. The lawyer's face reddened. These statements are clearly coerced. They're notarized, I said calmly, each one given freely with witnesses present. Linda was studying the folders intently, her expression shifting. This still doesn't address Mr. Wells' core claim that your file is vindictive fabrication, she said. No, it doesn't, I agreed. For that, we need outside verification. I stood and walked to the door, opening it to reveal Edward Torres wearing a visitor badge. This is Edward Torres, I introduced him. Former CFO at Jordan's previous company. The lawyer jumped up. This is outrageous. We weren't informed of additional witnesses. Edward took a seat beside me. I was terminated 3 months before Hartwell collapsed, after raising concerns about suspicious strategy changes. When Scott contacted me with the patterns he'd identified, I recognized them immediately. Linda leaned forward. Mr. Torres, are you claiming Jordan Wells deliberately undermined your company? I'm stating that the strategies he advocated were identical to the ones that bankrupted us, despite multiple warnings about their consequences. and that he received substantial consulting fees from the investment group that ultimately acquired our assets. The energy in the room shifted completely. Glenn turned to Linda. "We need to involve our compliance team immediately." The lawyer was frantically texting. "My client rejects these baseless accusations. Mr. Torres was terminated for performance issues." Edward smiled grimly. "Actually, I was offered a generous severance in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement, which I did sign regarding the company itself. But that agreement doesn't prevent me from discussing individual employees' actions, particularly when those actions might constitute corporate espionage." Linda turned to the lawyer. "Does Mr. Wells wish to respond in person?" The lawyer's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression souring. "My client is unavailable." "I see." Linda closed her folder. "Then we'll proceed with the full investigation." As the meeting adjourned, I remained seated. This wasn't victory yet, but it was progress. 2 weeks later, Glenn called me personally. "The investigation has concluded," he said without preamble. "Jordan's been terminated. The FBI is investigating Morrison Industries for corporate espionage." I set down my coffee. "And me? Your position is waiting for you, with a promotion to VP of Operations and a formal apology from the board. When do I start? Monday, if you want." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. My phone buzzed with a text from Charles Bennett. "Heard the news. When can we schedule that operations review? Also, we're expanding production and need an experienced partner." Monday morning, I walked back into my old office. My desk was back, my plaques rehung, my view restored. But more importantly, I had something Jordan never understood: the respect of people who knew the difference between competence and connections. Henry knocked on my door around lunch. "So, what's next, boss?" I looked out at the manufacturing floor. My manufacturing floor, humming with activity. 200 people building something valuable, something real. Next, we get back to work. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's being so good at what you do that when they reveal their true nature, you're the one left standing. And that's a lesson worth 23 years of experience. In the corporate world, they'll always bet on flash over substance until the crisis hits and they need someone who actually knows how the machine works. Document everything, stay patient, and remember, the guy who's been quietly building relationships for 20 years will always outlast the hotshot with a PowerPoint.